The fluorescent lights of Boston General Hospital cast their usual sterile glow across the rehabilitation ward's corridors. Sarah Thompson adjusted her navy blue scrubs as she started her regular Tuesday morning shift. At 32, she had been working as a pediatric nurse for 7 years, but today's assignment was different. She had been temporarily transferred to help in the rehabilitation ward due to staff shortages. Her chocolate-brown skin glistened with a thin layer of sweat as she rushed between patients, her tight curls pulled back neatly in a practical bun. Sarah loved her job, even on the most challenging days. Growing up in a middle-class family in Philadelphia, she had always dreamed of helping others, following in her mother's footsteps, who was also a nurse. It was during her lunch break when fate decided to play its hand. Sarah was walking past room 407, balancing her sandwich and coffee, when she heard a crash followed by frustrated muttering. Without hesitation, she placed her lunch on the nearby counter and rushed into the room. There she found Michael Chen, a 35-year-old former software engineer, trying to reach his fallen book from his wheelchair. His black hair fell across his forehead as he stretched unsuccessfully toward the floor. Sarah noticed immediately how his determined expression didn't match his seemingly helpless situation. "Let me help you with that," Sarah offered, stepping forward. Michael looked up, slightly embarrassed, but with a warm smile that reached his dark brown eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a gentle strength. "I'm still getting used to calculating distances from this height." As Sarah handed him the book, a copy of The Art of Computer Programming, their eyes met. She noticed how his entire face lit up when he smiled, creating small creases around his eyes that gave him a kind, approachable appearance. "You're into programming?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. It wasn't often that she found patients reading such technical material. "Was," Michael corrected, then quickly added with a grin, "still am, actually. Just because my legs don't work doesn't mean my brain stopped coding." His self-deprecating humor caught Sarah off guard, making her laugh unexpectedly. She learned that Michael had been a successful software engineer at a major tech company until 3 months ago. A rock climbing accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down. But what struck Sarah most wasn't his disability. It was his unwavering optimism and sharp wit. "I'm actually working on a new project," Michael explained, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "I'm developing an app to help people with disabilities navigate public spaces more easily. Want to hear about it?" Sarah checked her watch. Her break was almost over, but something about Michael's passion made her want to stay. "I got 5 minutes," she said, pulling up a chair. Those 5 minutes turned into 15 as Michael explained his ideas, his hands moving animatedly as he talked about user interfaces and accessibility features. Sarah found herself drawn not just to his intelligence, but to his resilience and determination to make something positive out of his situation. Later that evening, as Sarah was finishing her shift, she passed by room 407 again. Michael was sleeping peacefully, his book resting on his chest. She quietly entered the room to adjust his blanket and noticed a small notebook on his side table, filled with coding diagrams and app design sketches. Something about Michael's story touched her deeply. In her 7 years of nursing, she had seen many patients struggle with life-altering injuries, but Michael's approach to his situation was different. Instead of letting his disability define him, he was already thinking about how to help others in similar situations. As Sarah drove home that evening, she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. She had always believed that true strength wasn't about physical abilities, but about the power of the human spirit. In just one brief encounter, Michael had reinforced this belief. Little did Sarah know that this chance meeting would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge her perceptions, test her convictions, and ultimately change her life in ways she never imagined. As she pulled into her apartment complex, she found herself looking forward to her next shift in the rehabilitation ward, wondering what other surprises room 407 might hold. That night, before going to bed, Sarah added a small note to her daily journal. "Met an interesting patient today. Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us exactly where we need to be." Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself spending more and more time around room 407. She would arrive at work 30 minutes early, bringing an extra coffee for Michael. Their morning conversations became the highlight of her day, even though she tried to convince herself it was just professional concern for a patient. Michael's progress in physical therapy was slow but steady. Sarah often watched from the doorway as he worked with his therapist, admiring his determination. Even when his arms shook from exhaustion, he would crack jokes that made everyone in the room laugh. His positive attitude was infectious, spreading through the entire rehabilitation ward. One morning, as Sarah was checking his vital signs, Michael gathered his courage and asked, "Would you like to have dinner with me once I'm discharged next week?" His hands fidgeted with his blanket as he waited for her answer. "I know a great Chinese restaurant that's wheelchair accessible." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been hoping he would ask, but now that he had, the reality of their situation hit her. She was a nurse, he was her patient, and there were so many complications to consider. But looking into his hopeful eyes, she found herself saying, "Yes, I'd like that." News of their dinner plans spread quickly through the hospital. Sarah overheard the whispers from her coworkers. Some thought it was sweet, while others questioned her judgment. "Are you sure about this?" her best friend and fellow nurse, Lisa, asked during their lunch break. Taking care of someone as a nurse is different from dating them. But it wasn't just at work where Sarah faced questions. When she told her parents about Michael during their weekly Sunday dinner, their reactions were mixed. Her mother, Grace, dropped her fork with a clatter. "Sarah, honey, life is already hard enough for a black woman in this country. Why make it more complicated?" Her father, James, was more direct. "Have you thought about the future? What about children? The responsibilities?" His words came from a place of concern, but they still stung. Meanwhile, Michael was facing his own battles. His traditional Chinese parents, who had flown in from San Francisco to help with his discharge, were struggling to accept the situation. His mother, Lai Wei, would quietly ask in Mandarin if he was sure about dating someone from a different background. His father, Chen Wei, was more concerned about Michael's ability to be a proper husband while being wheelchair-bound. Despite all the doubts surrounding them, Sarah and Michael went on their first date. The Chinese restaurant was small but cozy, and true to Michael's word, perfectly accessible. Sarah watched in amazement as Michael ordered their entire meal in fluent Mandarin, making the elderly restaurant owner beam with approval. During dinner, they talked about everything except his disability. Sarah shared stories about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her dreams of eventually opening a small clinic in an underserved community. Michael told her about growing up as a first-generation American, the pressure to succeed, and his secret passion for painting, which he hadn't given up despite his accident. As they were finishing their meal, an elderly couple at the next table stopped by. The woman smiled warmly at them and said, "You two make such a lovely couple. Love knows no boundaries, does it?" Those words stayed with Sarah as Michael drove her home in his adaptive vehicle. Watching him confidently navigate the car with hand controls, she realized something important. She wasn't falling for a disabled man. She was falling for Michael, whose disability was just one part of who he was. That night, after their date, both Sarah and Michael faced phone calls from their worried families. But something had changed. There was a new confidence in how they handled the concerns. "Mom," Sarah said firmly to her mother's latest worry, "I'm not just seeing his wheelchair. I'm seeing his heart, his mind, and his spirit. Isn't that what you always taught me to look for in a person?" In his own apartment, Michael was having a similar conversation with his parents. "Ta bu ji shai wu de hu shit, ta shai rang wu zong sin chiang, sin a king de ren," he told them in Mandarin. "She's not just my nurse, she's the person who made me believe in love again." As they both drifted off to sleep that night, in their separate homes but with shared thoughts, they knew they had taken the first real step in their journey together. The barriers ahead were real, but their determination to face them together was even stronger. As spring turned into summer, Sarah and Michael's relationship blossomed in unexpected ways. They created their own unique rhythm of life, finding joy in moments that others might take for granted. Their love story wasn't typical, but it was beautiful in its own special way. Sarah learned that dating someone in a wheelchair required thinking differently about their activities, but Michael's creativity made everything an adventure. Instead of traditional movie dates, they enjoyed private film screenings in Michael's apartment, where he would share fascinating details about how special effects were created, drawing from his tech background. One sunny Saturday morning, Michael surprised Sarah with an unusual date. He had arranged for them to take a cooking class together. The kitchen was specially adapted with lowered counters, and Michael had practiced using the modified equipment beforehand. Sarah watched in amazement as he skillfully chopped vegetables and seasoned dishes, all from his wheelchair. My mom always said the way to someone's heart is through their stomach. Michael joked as he expertly flipped a pancake, though she probably didn't imagine I'd be doing it sitting down. Their laughter filled the kitchen, but it was interrupted by a small accident. Michael's wheelchair caught on a cabinet, sending a bowl of flour crashing to the floor. For a moment, silence fell. These moments could still be difficult for Michael, reminding him of his limitations. But Sarah didn't miss a beat. She grabbed a handful of the spilled flour and playfully tossed it at Michael, turning a potential moment of frustration into one of joy. Soon, they were both covered in flour, laughing so hard they could barely breathe. "You know," Sarah said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes, "I think this is exactly what love should be, making the best of every moment, messy or not." Their relationship faced its share of challenges, too. Some restaurants weren't as accessible as they claimed to be. People would sometimes stare when they went out together, not sure what to make of the interracial couple where the man was in a wheelchair. But Sarah and Michael had developed their own way of handling these situations. One evening, at a local park, a small boy pointed at Michael's wheelchair and asked loudly, "What's wrong with him?" His mother looked mortified, but Michael smiled and said, "Nothing's wrong with me, buddy. My legs are taking a really long break, so I get to ride this cool chair everywhere instead." Sarah watched as Michael showed the curious child how his wheelchair worked, even letting him press the buttons that controlled different functions. She fell a little more in love with him in that moment, seeing how he could turn an awkward situation into a teaching opportunity. Their families were slowly coming around too. Sarah's mother, who had been skeptical at first, saw how Michael treated her daughter with respect and kindness. She started inviting him to Sunday family dinners, even learning to cook some Chinese dishes to make him feel welcome. Michael's parents, though still concerned about their son's future, couldn't deny the positive change in him since meeting Sarah. His mother noticed how he smiled more, and his father was impressed by Sarah's dedication to learning about their culture and traditions. One rainy evening, as they sat on Michael's balcony watching the storm, Sarah noticed something different about his apartment. There was a new painting on the wall, a beautiful watercolor of two people dancing in the rain. "Did you paint this?" she asked, amazed. Michael nodded. "It's us," he explained. "I may not be able to dance with you in the traditional way, but we've created our own dance, haven't we? The way we move through life together, supporting each other, finding new ways to joy. That's our dance." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She wheeled Michael's chair closer and kissed him softly. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." Later that night, as Sarah drove home, she thought about how much her life had changed since meeting Michael. She had learned that love wasn't about walking side by side. It was about moving through life together, whatever form that might take. In her rearview mirror, she could still see Michael in his apartment window, waving goodbye. She smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow together. Their love story might not look like others, but it was perfectly theirs. On a crisp autumn evening, Michael had been acting strangely all week. Sarah noticed how he kept checking his phone and having whispered conversations that stopped whenever she came near. Her nursing instincts told her something was up, but she couldn't figure out what. "Let's go to the Skyview restaurant tonight." Michael suggested casually that Friday. It was their favorite rooftop restaurant, where they had their third date. The owner, Mr. Rodriguez, had specially installed ramps after meeting them, making it their special place. Sarah agreed, though she noticed Michael seemed nervous. His hands were shaking slightly as he got ready, but he blamed it on the cold weather. What Sarah didn't know was that Michael had been planning this evening for 3 months, with help from an unlikely group of supporters. During his physical therapy sessions, instead of just doing his regular exercises, Michael had been secretly practicing something special. His therapist, Dr. Williams, had helped him design a series of wheelchair movements that, when viewed from above, would create a pattern. It had taken weeks of practice to get it perfect. The restaurant's security cameras have been repositioned, thanks to Mr. Rodriguez's help. Michael's best friend, Tom, a computer programmer, had set up a special live feed that would display on the restaurant's big screen at just the right moment. Everything was ready. When they arrived at the restaurant, Sarah was surprised to see it unusually empty for a Friday night. Their usual table was decorated with red roses, and Mr. Rodriguez himself came to greet them with champagne. "The stars are beautiful tonight," Michael said, guiding his wheelchair toward the outdoor terrace. Sarah followed, wrapping her shawl tightly against the autumn breeze. The city lights sparkled below them like fallen stars. "Remember our first time here?" Sarah asked, sipping her champagne. "You were so worried about managing your wheelchair on the terrace." Michael smiled, remembering. "And you told me we'd figure it out together. That's when I knew you were special." His voice was soft, filled with emotion. As they finished their main course, Michael excused himself, saying he needed to use the restroom. Instead, he went to the designated starting point on the terrace. His heart was racing. Everything had to be perfect. "Sarah," he called out, "could you do me a favor? Mr. Rodriguez wants to show you something on the big screen inside." Confused but curious, Sarah walked inside. The restaurant's large screen flickered to life, showing a live feed of the terrace from above. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched Michael begin to move. His wheelchair glided across the terrace in precise, graceful movements. Slowly, the pattern became clear. From the aerial view, his movements were spelling out words. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she read, "MARRIES." When she rushed back outside, tears streaming down her face, she found Michael holding a small velvet box. Inside was a beautiful ring, not too flashy, but elegant and unique, just like their love. "Sarah Thompson." Michael's voice was steady now, all nervousness gone. "You saw past my wheelchair and saw me. You taught me that love has no limitations. Will you marry me?" Through her tears, Sarah managed to say yes. She knelt down to kiss him as the restaurant staff, who had been hiding inside, burst into applause. Mr. Rodriguez appeared with more champagne, and suddenly their families emerged from their hiding spots. "You were all in on this?" Sarah asked, looking around at the smiling faces. Her parents were there, beaming with joy. Michael's parents too, his mother wiping away tears. "It took a village," Michael laughed. "Dr. Williams helped me practice the wheelchair choreography. Tom set up the camera feed. Your dad helped choose the ring. And Mr. Rodriguez closed the restaurant just for us." Sarah's mother hugged her tightly. When Michael came to ask for our blessing, she whispered, showing us his elaborate plan, "We knew he was the one for you. Love like this doesn't come along every day." Later that night, as their families celebrated around them, Sarah looked at her new fiancé with pure love. The ring sparkled on her finger, but it wasn't nearly as bright as the joy in her heart. "I have one more surprise," Michael said softly, so only she could hear. But that would have to wait for their wedding day. The months following the proposal were filled with both excitement and challenges. Sarah and Michael quickly learned that planning a wheelchair-accessible wedding wasn't simple, but they were determined to make their special day perfect. Their first challenge came when looking for a wedding venue. Many of the beautiful historical churches and halls that Sarah had dreamed about since childhood had stairs everywhere and no elevators. After visiting 12 different places, they finally found a gorgeous garden venue with wide paths and ramps hidden elegantly among the flowers. "It's perfect," Sarah said, watching butterflies dance around the rose bushes. "Like it was meant for us." Michael squeezed her hand, grateful for how she always found the bright side of their challenges. But venue hunting was just the beginning. Sarah's mother, Grace, was struggling to blend traditional Black American wedding customs with Chinese traditions that Michael's family held dear. The two mothers often sat together for hours, sometimes arguing, sometimes laughing, as they tried to plan the perfect ceremony. "We can't have the traditional Chinese tea ceremony with Michael in his wheelchair," Lai Wai worried one afternoon. "It won't be proper." "Then we'll make it proper," Grace declared, her creative mind already working. "We'll adjust the table heights. Every tradition can be adapted with love." Michael, meanwhile, was keeping a big secret. 3 times a week, while Sarah was working night shifts at the hospital, he went to a special physical therapy center. He had been selected for an experimental treatment that showed promise in helping people with spinal cord injuries. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but Michael didn't want to get Sarah's hopes up. The wedding dress shopping brought its own tears. Sarah found her dream dress, but then realized she would be towering over Michael in the photos. When she mentioned possibly not wearing heels, Michael put his foot down. "You'll wear those heels," he insisted. "I fell in love with a strong, tall, beautiful woman. That's who I want to marry." Cultural clashes popped up regularly. Michael's aunt insisted that red must be the main wedding color for good luck, while Sarah's grandmother wanted traditional white. They eventually compromised with white wedding outfits and bold red decorations. One evening, during a cake tasting session, an insensitive baker asked Sarah if she was sure about marrying someone like him. Before Sarah could respond, Michael spoke up. "Someone like me?" he asked calmly. "You mean someone who runs a successful software company from his wheelchair? Someone who just received a patent for an app helping disabled people navigate cities better? Or did you mean someone who won his fiancée's heart despite people like you?" The baker apologized profusely, but they took their business elsewhere. That night, Sarah found Michael looking troubled. "Does it bother you?" he asked quietly. "All these extra challenges just because you chose me?" Sarah sat in his lap, something she did when she wanted him to really listen. "I didn't choose a wheelchair, Michael. I chose you. The challenges are just part of our story." As the wedding day got closer, both families began working together more smoothly. Michael's mother taught Sarah's family how to make dumplings for the rehearsal dinner. Sarah's father spent hours helping Michael design a special wheelchair ramp for the wedding altar that would look elegant in photos. The biggest surprise came during the wedding rehearsal. Michael's physical therapy team had been working with the wedding planner in secret. They had designed a special support system hidden by decorations that would help Michael during key moments of the ceremony. "Just in case," his therapist said with a mysterious smile, "keep practicing those exercises." On the night before their wedding, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat on her parents' porch, looking at the stars. Her mother joined her with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "You know what I see when I look at you and Michael," Grace said softly. "I see love that's strong enough to move mountains. All these months of planning, every obstacle you faced, you two have handled it all with grace and love." Sarah smiled, thinking about their journey. "Tomorrow's going to be perfect, isn't it, Mom?" "Perfect doesn't mean without challenges, baby. It means facing them together, and you two have mastered that art." What Sarah didn't know was that at that very moment, Michael was practicing something special in his apartment, determined to give his bride the biggest surprise of her life at tomorrow's reception. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was celebrating with them. At the garden venue, flowers bloomed in perfect harmony, white roses mixed with red peonies, bridging both families' traditions in a beautiful display. Sarah stood in the bridal suite, her hands shaking slightly as her mother helped her into her wedding dress. The gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk, with delicate red embroidery that honored Michael's Chinese heritage. Her dark skin glowed against the fabric, and when the makeup artist finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "Something borrowed," her grandmother said, pinning a vintage pearl brooch to her dress. "This was mine on my wedding day." "Something blue," her mother added, sliding a sapphire bracelet onto her wrist. "Something red," Michael's mother smiled, presenting a traditional red envelope for luck. The two families had grown close over the months, their differences forgotten in the joy of this day. Meanwhile, in the groom's room, Michael was getting ready with help from his father and best man. His black tuxedo had been specially tailored to look perfect while sitting. But there was something else in the room, a mysterious medical equipment bag that his physical therapy team had brought. "Are you ready, son?" his father asked in Mandarin, helping him adjust his red tie. "More ready than I've ever been," Michael replied, his eyes shining with excitement and another emotion his father couldn't quite read. Was it anticipation? The ceremony space looked magical. The aisle was wide and smooth, with gentle slopes instead of steps. Strings of lights hung overhead, ready to twinkle as evening approached. The guests filled the seats, a beautiful mix of faces from different cultures and backgrounds, all united in celebration of this unique love story. As the music began, the wedding party made their entrance. The bridesmaids wore deep red dresses that caught the sunlight, and the groomsmen's black suits were accented with red ties matching Michael's. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The music changed to a special arrangement that blended traditional Chinese wedding music with "Here Comes the Bride." Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle with her father, and the guests collectively gasped. She was radiant. Her white dress sparkled in the sunlight, the red embroidery catching the light like flames. Her curly hair was styled elegantly, with a few strands framing her face, but it was her smile, bright and genuine, that captured everyone's hearts. Michael waited at the altar, and for a moment, all he could do was stare in awe as Sarah walked toward him. Through his tears of joy, he whispered, "You are so beautiful." The ceremony combined elements from both their backgrounds. They had written their own vows, speaking from their hearts about love that knows no boundaries. Sarah spoke about learning to dance to life's unexpected rhythms, while Michael talked about finding strength in vulnerability and love in acceptance. With this ring, Sarah said clearly, her voice full of emotion, I promise to always see the best in you, to face all challenges by your side, and to keep dancing with you through life, no matter what rhythm we find. Michael's voice was steady as he replied, with this ring, I promise to be your partner in all things, to keep making you laugh, and to love you more each day, showing the world that true love knows no limitations. The minister smiled warmly. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Sarah leaned down gracefully as Michael reached up, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a promise. The garden erupted in cheers and applause. As they turned to face their guests as newlyweds, butterflies were released into the air, a surprise from both sets of parents. The delicate creatures danced around them, red and white wings catching the sunlight. Perfect timing, Michael whispered to Sarah, glancing at his physical therapy team who stood ready at the back. Because I have a surprise for you at the reception that will make this moment even more magical. Sarah looked at him curiously, but Michael just smiled, keeping his secret a little longer. As they began their exit down the aisle, their guests threw red and white rose petals, creating a beautiful shower of love and hope. What awaited them at the reception would change everything, but for now, they were simply happy, newly married, and deeply in love. The wedding reception was held in a beautifully decorated ballroom next to the garden. Round tables dotted the space, each one decorated with centerpieces that mixed red and white flowers. Chinese paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over everything. Sarah noticed unusual activity around their main table. Michael's physical therapy team was quietly setting up something behind a decorative screen, and she kept seeing them whisper with the wedding planner. But whenever she tried to get a closer look, someone would distract her with congratulations or photos. Don't worry about anything, Michael said, squeezing her hand. Just enjoy the moment. His eyes sparkled with excitement, making Sarah both curious and nervous. The reception began with a beautiful entrance. Instead of the traditional wedding party dance, they had planned something special. As Michael and Sarah entered, the bridesmaids and groomsmen created an honor guard with traditional Chinese red ribbons held high, forming an elegant tunnel. The first surprise came during dinner. Both families had worked together to create a menu that blended their cultures. There was southern fried chicken next to Chinese dumplings, collard greens beside stir-fried vegetables, and mac and cheese sharing space with lo mein. The wedding cake was a masterpiece, white with red decorations, and each layer featured a different flavor representing both their backgrounds. Sarah's father stood up for his speech first. His voice shook with emotion as he talked about watching his daughter grow into a woman strong enough to follow her heart. When Sarah first told us about Michael, he said, I worried about the challenges they would face. But watching them together, I learned that love doesn't see barriers, it breaks them down. Michael's mother spoke next, switching between English and Mandarin. She talked about her initial fears giving way to joy as she watched her son find happiness. In our culture, she said, red represents good fortune, but Sarah has brought more than luck to our family. She has brought love that knows no boundaries. As the speeches continued, Sarah noticed more movement behind the decorative screen. Michael's physical therapist had changed into formal clothes and was now standing nearby with what looked like medical equipment hidden behind some flowers. Sarah's nursing instincts told her something big was about to happen. Then it was time for Michael's speech. The room grew quiet as he moved his wheelchair to the center of the dance floor. Sarah sat at their table, her heart beating fast, wondering what was coming next. Sarah, Michael began, his voice clear and strong. When I had my accident, I thought my life as I knew it was over. But then you walked into my hospital room, and you didn't see a man in a wheelchair. You saw me. He paused, emotion making his voice crack slightly. You've shown me that love isn't about walking side by side. It's about moving through life together, however we can. You've adapted your world to include my wheelchair without ever making me feel different or less. You've danced with me in your own special way, never caring what others might think. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on Michael's every word. Sarah could see tears in many eyes, including her own. But my love, Michael continued, I've been keeping a secret from you. He nodded to his physical therapy team, who quickly moved the decorative screen aside, revealing what they had been hiding. Behind the screen was a set of advanced medical braces and support equipment. Sarah's medical training told her immediately what they were for, but her mind couldn't quite believe it. For the past 6 months, Michael said, as his physical therapist approached with the equipment, I've been part of an experimental medical program. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was sure. And today, my love, I have something special planned for our first dance. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was about to happen. Around her, guests were shifting in their seats, excitement building in the room. Everyone seemed to know what was coming except her. Michael's therapist began fitting the braces to his legs, while another assistant adjusted something at his back. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. The next few moments would change everything, but for now, the room held its breath in anticipation. The entire reception hall fell silent as Michael's physical therapy team finished securing the special braces to his legs. Sarah sat at the head table, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she watched her new husband prepare for something she never thought possible. My dear wife, Michael said, his voice strong and clear, for our first dance, I wanted to give you something magical. He nodded to his therapist, who pressed a button on the advanced medical brace system. Slowly, steadily, Michael began to rise from his wheelchair. Sarah's gasp was heard throughout the room. Her nursing training told her she was witnessing a miracle of modern medicine, but her heart was simply seeing the man she loved standing for the first time since his accident. Using the specially designed braces and supports, Michael stood up completely. He was tall, taller than Sarah had imagined during all those months of seeing him in his wheelchair. His legs shook slightly, but his smile was triumphant. The experimental program, he explained, taking a small step forward, has been helping me regain nerve function in my legs. I've been practicing in secret for months, wanting this moment to be perfect for you. The wedding guests watched in amazed silence as Michael took another step, and then another. His physical therapy team stayed close, but he was moving on his own. The months of secret practice were paying off. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't speak. She just watched as her husband, who she had fallen in love with, never expecting him to walk again, made his way toward her. When he reached her chair, he held out his hand. May I have this dance, Mrs. Chen? Through her tears, Sarah nodded and took his hand. As she stood, the wedding guests broke into emotional applause. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The music began to play, At Last by Etta James, and Michael pulled Sarah close. The braces helped him stay steady as they began to sway together. It wasn't perfect ballroom dancing, but it was their dance, and it was beautiful. I've been practicing this for so long, Michael whispered in her ear as they moved together. Every time you worked a night shift, I was at therapy, learning to stand again, learning to take steps. I fell down so many times, but thinking of this moment kept me going. Sarah couldn't stop crying. Why didn't you tell me? She asked softly. Because I wanted to give you this moment, and because I wasn't sure it would work. The doctors said there was only a 50% chance the treatment would help, but I had to try for you. As they danced, Michael told her more about the experimental program. The braces used advanced technology to help his nerves remember how to work with his muscles. You would need more therapy, more practice, but the doctors were hopeful he might regain up to 70% of his leg function. But Sarah, he said seriously, even if this hadn't worked, even if I stayed in that wheelchair forever, I need you to know that your love made me feel whole again. You never made me feel less than complete. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing all the love and determination that had made her fall in love with him. Wheelchair or walking, she said, you're the man I chose. This is just an amazing bonus. Their guests watched the miracle unfold on the dance floor, many filming the moment on their phones. Both mothers held each other, crying happy tears. Sarah's father nodded proudly, while Michael's father couldn't stop smiling. As the song ended, Michael kissed Sarah deeply. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing past my wheelchair to the man inside, for loving me completely, for being my strength when I needed it most. Sarah touched his face gently. Thank you for never giving up, for showing me that love really has no limits, for making me believe in miracles. Together, they faced their guests, Michael standing tall beside his bride. Their journey had been unusual, filled with challenges and surprises, but their love had proven stronger than any obstacle. As they began their new life together, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, sometimes walking, sometimes rolling, but always moving forward together in love. The end.